Hey there! Welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel, I said that weird. Anyway, on our panel today we have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live from the shed.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And this week we have a special guest. It is Andrzej. Is it Mazur? Or am I anywhere close? You want to introduce yourself? Let us know who you are and why you're famous.
So I was a front-end developer for many years, and then around 2012 I decided to see if making web games is possible full-time. Then I switched, started Enclave Games company, started the JS13K Games competition, Game Dev JS meetups and other things around web games. And I'm trying to make some decent money out of that ever since.
Nice. So, I'm kind of curious where to get started. The way I found you, just to put it out there, I was looking around. I'd been talking to some folks about starting a game dev podcast, because we've had different people from different game dev systems. On the Ruby podcast, we had Amir Rajan, who does Ruby Motion, which is mostly, he's turned into a game dev platform in Ruby. I've talked to Jason Wyman, who does game.dev, I think, is his website. And he has a bunch of courses on using the Unity engine. So I was like, well, I wonder if we could do this in JavaScript, right? Because that would be cool. And then can I just put it on the web? I can do kind of an Angry Birds or, maybe something simpler or maybe something more complex. On web technology, I came across gamedev.js. Subscribe to the newsletter, and I'm always just poking. I kind of lurk. I haven't actually dabbled yet, but maybe you can help change that for us and give us an idea of where to start, because that's ultimately where I'm at. I'm like, okay, well, I do JavaScript. I know JavaScript. Web dev is something that I'm pretty familiar with, so I have some of the tools. What do I need to do in order to build the game?
So the cool thing is you already know the language, you already know the tools. I was the one who was switching from front end. I was experimenting with web games or games in general. When I was studying, I was trying to make a platformer game in C++ because it was the first and only language that I learned back then. So there was a whole bunch of experimenting. So like 2006, 2007 or something, I was already building games with jQuery.
Oh, wow.
So it's totally possible. It makes absolutely no sense, but it worked.
I was going to say, I don't know whether to admire you or pity you.
I admire you. I admire you. I don't pity you at all. jQuery was wonderful. Those were good days.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
Simple.
I mean, it was using the tools that we were building websites and then see if you can actually build some interactive stuff to a level of like a full-blown game. It was really nice to try with that. And for a few years, I was experimenting with that and seeing that, okay, it's not entirely easy. Like around 2011, 2012, I was giving talks about, is it possible to make games with HTML5? And it was kind of possible, but it was still difficult. I remember the fact that so I've built a few games, mostly with jQuery, then found some actual JavaScript game engines. It was Impact.js, then Phaser, which came out in 2013. And it was cool to see some games, like there were lists of like top 30 best HTML5 games or like top 20 most creative web games or something like that. And so we more or less knew each other because it was literally 20 or 30 games total back then. So if you made anything, it was ending up on the list and was copied over to all the other lists. So the discoverability was really cool in a way that you just built something, somebody learned about it, and it was becoming quite popular because it kind of worked and there wasn't much to play to see. And that's actually when I started traveling around the world and telling people how to make web games, because I made one. And it was
nice.
one more than the average. So that was really cool. And it was still difficult. The technology wasn't there. It was kind of possible, but you had to bend this a lot. First games didn't have any music or sounds. The rendering was really slow and crappy. But fast forward 10 or more years, and we are there. It's fairly easy to build web games. We are laughing that in the community that back then there was literally like 20 or 30 developers who released a game. Now there are folks who are making hundreds of web games and we don't know who they are. That's easy. It is. And this is also quite the challenge with discoverability and monetization. When you have so many games, it's a lot more difficult to make a living out of that. And getting back to how would you start, right now there's a whole lot of tutorials on many game engines. You can pick game engines. If you know JavaScript, you can write games from scratch. You can find some engines to use them to write JavaScript. If you have absolutely no knowledge about JavaScript at all, there are game engines in which you will drag and drop components, set stuff in the editor, export to the web, and it will work. So that's totally possible. And you mentioned Game Dev JS Weekly, which runs since 2014. It started in January 2014. Every Friday it's out. And we have the tutorials section, and there's literally at least one or two tutorials in every single issue since January 2014. And it's a really good material to look into it. But as I said, if you are curious about game engines, you can look for some comparisons, see which is interesting for you if you want to program, if you want to drag and drop, and then look for tutorials or written or videos or whatever. There's a lot of materials out there. So it's really, compared to a few years ago, it's almost impossible to not find anything on your issue or on your idea that you have.
Cool. So kind of going back to where we started, I mean, how do I start, right? It sounds like there are multiple ways to start. It sounds like, things kind of get shared around a bit. But yeah, if I wanted to go build my own game, right, I have an idea for a game. How do I build it? Like, how do I get something out there that people can go play with?
So I think the easiest is to copy something easy, like make yet another Flappy Bird clone, or like a Breakout game or Tetris or whatever. You won't win prizes with that in some game jams or competitions or whatever, but I think it is still the best way. At least it was. It felt for me that it was definitely the best to see how things are made and look into the source code and try to replicate that. I remember this from learning web development when snowy effect in JavaScript was the huge hit on the websites, and like, how do you make snowfall on the website with just a few lines of JavaScript, and you could just view source it, see how it works, and then copy it over, then modify it. So I think, like, at least for me, this was the best way to start, to see how other folks are building something, and then try to replicate it, either copy parts of the code, change it, or like try to do it with the knowledge I already have. So one thing would be checking for tutorials and just following them. The other would be trying to build something small, something known. So there's a whole bunch of materials about it. But if you have your own idea, I can totally say go ahead and try to build it with what you know already, or look for game engines that could help you do that. But if you want to start writing in pure JavaScript, that's perfectly fine. For experimenting, there's a whole bunch of games out there which are open sourced. The JS13K Games competition we are organizing since 2012. Every single game from every single edition, the source code is on GitHub. So you can play it on the website, but you can also look into the source code and see what crazy things folks did to achieve what they did.
So
Right.
between WebGL and Canvas and just having divs with CSS, where is a better place to start?
I think with Canvas, I went through all of those, started with jQuery and like moving divs and seeing what happens. And knowing JavaScript, knowing HTML before diving into web games helped me build those first experiments. And Canvas back then was really not well optimized. So it was quite difficult to get some cool effects. But then on the canvas, you can paint whatever you want, basically, if you know how to do it. And with WebGL, as long as it was 2D rendering, not 3D, engines will abstract that from you, so you don't even need to look what's actually happening. But I think it's worth learning all of that to have some perspective on what are the differences, and also doing all that to see how much stuff game engines are doing for you. But I think it's quite important to do that before diving into game engine, to know that if something is happening, something is not working, you have some issues, then you can actually look into the source code of the game engine, for example, and or like see errors in the console, and then know what's going wrong, what's happening. But I think if you're focusing only on like trying to release something, it's perfectly fine to do a shortcut and just pick an engine, look into the tutorials, learn some basic examples, and try to build what you want to build.
So I'm looking at one of the websites you supplied, the Enclave Games, and there is a game called Forest Cuties that's basically a memory match game.
Yeah.
To me, this looks like it's done in HTML and JavaScript. This doesn't look like a Canvas game. What is this? Is this HTML and JavaScript, or is it Canvas?
So this is Canvas, but the very first card game I've built was just HTML and JavaScript, but it was like literally 11 years ago or 13 or something like that. But right now, Canvas rendering is really fast, and there are tools, engines which will help you develop stuff faster. So, for example, Forest Cuties is a game created in Phaser, which abstracts a lot of things. So I could change the rendering method from Canvas to WebGL, and I will not need to change any, like it's with one line of JavaScript that I'm gonna switch between those. And this is abstracted to a point that I'm using the engine to build components to render stuff on the screen, and I don't need to touch Canvas at all. So that's cool, and it doesn't matter that much what tools do you use as long as the game is entertaining. So for most of the players, it could be Canvas, it could be HTML, it could be Unity export, it could be pure JavaScript or jQuery. As long as they enjoy the game, that's perfectly cool.
That is cool. And this being a card game, I just wanted to jump in because I've talked to a few people that they have like card games or board games that they want to convert as opposed to, kind of a platform game or a side scroll game. And so that looks cool too. It's just an opportunity to, it doesn't have to be kind of your traditional video game. Anyway, go ahead. AJ, you were going to ask something else.
I was going to say, do you think that it is better to learn the primitives first to learn Canvas, or do you think that it's better to learn the patterns first by having some sort of game engine that abstracts it?
I think it's better to start with the primitives, with experimenting with pure JavaScript. But I'm totally leaving that to whoever wants to try. It's like I know game creators who haven't written a single JavaScript line, and they are web game developers and doing perfectly fine. So it's not needed for releasing games and being a successful developers. But given I was a front-end developer and I have this background, I had a proposition to create more and more games with tools where I drag and drop components. And in theory, it would be faster to release more games, but I really like coding and I really like tinkering with JavaScript code. So I really prefer using, for example, Phaser than, for example, I don't know, Unity export or whatever, or like game engines where you drag and drop components. But I think it really depends on what you want to achieve. Like I would recommend learning JavaScript, HTML, CSS first. But it's not necessary. I can totally see folks diving deep into any picked game engine and just learning the tool and building cool games and releasing them.
So it sounds like you recommend people understand the fundamentals, but you recognize that some people are just going to do the game dev and they might get bogged down with the other pieces of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different cases how someone got into web game dev that it's really up to them.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I know some people. I mean, my example of this is when I first got into development in a big way, right? So I had done some at school, some software development, things like that. But when I really got into web development, I was learning Ruby on Rails. And so I learned Rails, and then I kind of picked up how Ruby and its fundamentals worked, working in a higher level framework. And you could get some of that, I guess, from Phaser. But at the same time, if you have a solid understanding of the fundamentals, it's going to serve you very well because then you're going to understand what's happening under the hood, and you can more easily troubleshoot and do things that are outside of the framework or beyond the norm, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And if I'm trying to do something with the game engine and it's not behaving exactly in a way that I want it to behave, I will sometimes just write a pure JavaScript function to do that for me. So that's the advantage. It's not needed. I could focus on just using the tool, but it could help in some situations. And sometimes if I see something is not working, then even though the game engine is abstracting a lot of things, then I can still know that it's not working because some rules that if I write it in JavaScript, then I would immediately recognize.
So one other thing, man, there's so many questions I want to ask in so little time. So one other thing that I'm wondering about is some of the engines that I've looked at, they kind of give you a template, right? So if you have like a top-down platformer like Legend of Zelda, right? It'll give you the pieces, and then you can replace the artwork, and you can change the behavior of things and stuff like that. And then others, they kind of expect you to construct a lot of that from scratch. Is Phaser more one or the other, and are there other engines that you recommend that take one approach or the other?
Phaser do have a bunch of templates. Well, not the engine itself. I mean, even
Right.
the Phaser creator offers some template code. But there are so many developers using Phaser that there are a whole bunch of starters, templates, and whatnot. And even I have one, which is Enclave Phaser template, and that's exactly what it does. Over the years, when I was building those 2D hyper casual games, usually in portrait, with simple core mechanics. The games always had the main menu, game over, all of those managing sounds and music. And so I did the template from I extracted things that were repeating instead of like copying over from previous projects or starting with recently finished and removing a bunch of stuff. I made a template. It's free and open sourced on GitHub, which contains the usual stuff that I need for my game. People find it useful because it's kind of old school. There is no build tools. It's just pure JavaScript file or a bunch of those that does something, and then if you want it, you can include that into your build step. But it's a template with main menu, with settings, managing sounds and music. But I know that developers building more than 2 or 3 games, they tend to either pick some templates that are already there, or if their games are too specific, they usually create their own.
Right.
But it's definitely something that most of the developers, especially more experienced, are either using or building. Because it helps a lot. It speeds up the development and removes all those boring things like showing and hiding settings, switching on and off the music or sounds. It's always the same. I can replace the button images or backgrounds, but the functionality is more or less the same. So it's boring, and I don't want to do it when I'm starting with a new fresh template. I'm jumping into the game loop and immediately trying to see if the game idea makes sense and focus on that.
That's awesome. One other question that I have is, let's say that I start putting together the game, right? So I use the template. I'm going to need music. I'm going to need art. I'm going to need, some of these other things that you've talked about. You said your wife's a graphic designer, so I'm assuming she helps you with some of this stuff. But if my wife is not a graphic designer, she manages the lunch program at the elementary school. How do I get artwork? Because I can't draw either.
Yeah, I mean, I feel kind of lucky with my wife being a graphic designer, because I can just go there and say, I need this, and I will more or less get it. I might get something totally different because she will have a totally different view on the project we want to build. But there are places where you can find graphic designs, sounds, and music for free. There's, I think it was Open Game Art, the service that there's literally like thousands of assets graphic design, sounds and music, where folks are sharing those assets. Most of them are free. Most of them have really good licenses in a way that you can use those in commercial projects as well. You should read the licensing, but in general, there are places where you can find the whole sets of assets for games. So you can literally build a game, basically any game with a full set that you can use without drawing a single image yourself.
Yep. Yeah, I've also so I talk to Jason like 2 or 3 times a month. Jason, who does game.courses. It's not game.dev, it's game.courses. And he's also mentioned the Unity app store or asset store has a bunch of stuff. You don't have to be using Unity to use it, but you can use a lot of their assets too.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are many places, more known or less known, that you can find assets. There's in the web game dev community, there's someone called Kenny NL, who creates assets that people are using mostly in tutorials. I would guess that like 80% of the tutorials are using his assets because they are free and open, and you don't have to worry about licensing because he's sharing that. So it's really cool as something that you can use. You don't need to draw anything. You can use those to prototype your idea. And then if you think this makes sense and you want to go further, you can always hire a designer or look for more specific assets that would fit your needs.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. One other one I'm going to throw out there. I use this for the podcast. I find the podcast music on it is audiojungle.net. I don't know if they have good video game music, but it might be worth looking at. And it's the difference is the licensing on music is funny sometimes, and so with theirs, it's all once you've paid for it, you have unlimited use license. So.
And like most of our games, Enclave games, sounds and music are taken from the web. We don't have an audio guy, so it's like literally let's look through the library and see which of those will just fit the best and go with that.
So, question with that. Have you had any issues where either you're doing demos of your game on YouTube or other people are live streaming playing a game? It looks like you're mostly in the hyper casual, so I don't know if people are live streaming that, but have you had these issues where people are getting YouTube content claims on music that is properly licensed? And how do you deal with that?
So with hyper casual games, there's not that much streaming, I would say. It's a bit different market, so we didn't have anything like this for our games.
Have you
since
done any?
We do have proper licensing, but
have you done any YouTube demos with them where you demo the gameplay on YouTube, or you just let people play it because they can just play it?
We actually didn't focus on the trailers or gameplays since a huge chunk of business on web games could be dealing with publishers and selling licenses for the games. So we, instead of targeting the players, we kind of make deals with publishers. We do have people playing our games directly and talking with us. So we do have the community around the games themselves. But the business side of things mostly revolve around publishers. And I haven't heard any issues with sounds or music. If they are properly licensed, they are perfectly fine. There are some let's players that tried the games, played the games, and there was no issues with that. But it's not that popular. There aren't like hundreds of YouTubers that play our games because
Right.
they're really small
I
and
know.
hyper casual, and you rather sit on the toilet and play the game yourself than watch someone plays on YouTube.
Yeah, I have a neighbor that he works for a game company. He's writing them in Xamarin. But yeah, he explained it the same way. He's like, we're not writing heavy games. We're writing the game that you sit on the toilet and play.
Exactly.
One other thing I'm just going to throw in with that. So I have run into this in the podcast community, right? Where somebody gets the license to use specific music, popular music in their podcast, and then they post it to YouTube, and YouTube, issues a copyright notice. The way that typically works, just if you run into this, is so people can file, at least in the U.S., they can file a claim against you using the Digital Copyright Millennial Copyright DCMA, DMCA. It's one of those.
DMCA, yeah.
So the way that works, because I've had them filed against some of the podcasts as well, is you can file a counterclaim, and then they actually have to demonstrate that they own the rights to the music or whatever. And then the flip side is that you also have the opportunity, and you can do it when you file your counterclaim. You can send a copy of your license to the music. And so between the two, they effectively then have to demonstrate that you have violated the license to the music, or YouTube or whoever else is more or less required to leave it up. Now, YouTube has an automated system that flags stuff now, but you essentially, you file the counterclaim the same way, and they have a form you can fill out, and it's the same for Apple Podcasts and Google and anyone else that posts music or anything else. So if you're wondering what that process is, it's not nearly as scary as you think it is, and you don't need to get a lawyer involved, at least at the first step.
And with DMCA, I do have some experience, unfortunately, because I was on the other side of the fence with shady publishers taking games from the website, publishing everywhere, and then earning money out of the adverts they implemented. So that's also kind of a problem, that if you publish something on the web and it works, you can more or less copy it. Even if you make it harder, it's not impossible. It's just the amount of time people have to spend to actually do it. So we do have some battles with some random publishers on the other side of the world, trying to explain them that you have to buy a license to be able to use the game.
Software is copyrightable as well.
So I know that this is off topic, but I just want a quick answer from you, Chuck. That the problem I've seen is that they repeatedly tag you every single video. So I had bought licensed music and I stopped using it because I got a claim on every single video, and there was nothing for me to do about it. And I thought, screw it. I paid.
You have to
nothing.
counter every single video. Yeah, you have to counter on every one of them.
Yeah, because to me that's not worth it. I don't want to spend my life countering.
It's not sustainable, really. I did have, so one of the things that I run into is that some of the games I like to play are on the web, right? So I can go play them in my browser, but then they're also published to some of the app stores on like Nintendo Switch or Xbox or whatever. Can you do that with these web JavaScript generated games?
Yes, but it's extremely difficult, and it makes almost no sense in a way that it's technically possible. There are tools that will allow you to package web games for native marketplaces, and there are single success stories where someone actually built a web game, released it for marketplaces, and earn a good amount of money. I don't know if you know Vampire Survivors. That's the game that was built with Phaser initially, and then the dev is switching to native tools because it will be just easier.
Right.
So it's technically possible. There are success stories. If you really want to do it, you can totally do it. But more to try the market to see if it gets the success. If it does, then you have enough money to actually either do it yourself or hire someone to build it natively for the marketplaces, and then I think it makes more sense. But I think the most important thing about the web platform is that you don't need to be on specific marketplaces. You can just send the URL and someone else can play the game almost instantly. And that's why I said it's not making much sense in a way that with web games, the web is the platform. You don't need to pay for someone to have your game in the marketplace or not, or pay for the adverts because it's the only way to reach the audience. A web game works like a website. You can do all the marketing, you can do whatever you want with it, and you can reach the audience, you can reach the players, you can do marketing and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing is the distribution platform. It's like sending the URL and that's it. It just works.
So I guess the other question that I'm running through in my head is, how do you monetize them? Because, you've got a catalog of games. I clicked through on one of them and I seem to be able to play it for free. And, that kind of, it's cool, but, it doesn't pay the bills. So how do you make money on them then?
So there are different ways to do it. Unfortunately, most of them involve adverts.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the revenue goes from showing advertising. Or if it's not showing advertising, it's selling your data somewhere to someone. Right. There are other ways to monetize games. There are many experiments. I don't know if you heard about the Web Monetization API, which is a way to stream micropayments when being on a specific website or playing in a specific game. So streaming micro payments in real time, like 1/100th of a cent or something like that.
Right.
But it's still highly experimental. And so you can put the advertisements yourself. You can try to do in-app purchases. You can build for native marketplaces. You can sell the games. You can use platforms like itch.io where you actually ask for a fixed price. You can ask for pay what you want. You can release for free and have donations. You can run Patreon. And one of the ways we are earning money is through licensing, which I already mentioned, which is talking with publishers who have traffic, who have some big amount of users and they want to entertain them. So they buy the licenses for our games, have the rights to show them on their own portal, and then they can do whatever they want with them in a way that they can either have a $5 paywall or show their own advertisements or advertise their own products, or there are so many ways to actually earn money. I mentioned that most of them are adverts, but there is a lot of effort to actually shift the focus to other things. But yeah, it's still difficult. Adverts still take most of the market.
Do you do any kind of like in-app purchase where people can buy like an asset or an extra, I don't know, an extra card or character or tool or something?
Not in our games specifically, as they are supposed to be hyper casual and simple. We don't even put any ads ourselves. So all the games are on our website, enclavegames.com, for free. And there's literally no no adverts, no paying, everything is free, because of we are doing deals with publishers, and then we are usually implementing their SDKs to show their ads on their portals. So we get paid to adjust our games, and then they are earning money from adverts.
Do you run into any kind of compatibility issues, like Chrome or Chrome extensions, or specific other browsers, or on mobile, or anything like that?
Yeah, that was a big issue 10-ish years ago, that browsers were implementing the same things in a different way, especially if you weren't using tools or engines that were abstracting that from you. Like from the times that you had to do CSS prefixes for different browsers. So it felt the same. The audio had to be done in like 5 different ways for every browser engine, or you have to have like 5 different formats, because this one will work here, this one will work there, those two may be here, but not entirely. So it's a lot better right now. But recently, with Chrome taking over the market and being almost a monopoly, with Firefox losing a market, that's not looking good, because you need to have competing browser engines and ecosystems. So that's how standards should be built, in a way that the standard is created and then browser vendors follow that, not
Right.
like Chrome picking some idea, implementing it, and then saying it works like this, and you have to catch up.
One other thing that I'm looking at is you've got a couple of games here that are different types, and so I wanted to ask a few questions about those. One is, how do you, so like you've got Forest Cuties, which is kind of a memory game, and that's just going to be what it is. But some of these, like I was looking at the Bodyguard game, for example, and it looks like it might, you tap on the screen to move the destroy viruses and stuff like that. How do you make sure that it's hard enough to be interesting, but not so hard that it makes me want to give up?
It's a matter of testing, and but important thing is to not like, of course, when you're a developer, you are the very first tester as well. But from the competitions I'm organizing, I'm seeing developers not having time to ask other people to actually play test the games. So in most of the time, they end up too hard. Because if you're the creator, then you know the game from memory, and you have no issues playing it because you were doing that from the very beginning.
Right.
But you should ask other folks to try it who haven't seen your game at all, or like not are that skilled, or are experts in other types, on other genres of games. So it's kind of crucial to share the game with testers, be it your family, friends, or like random people on the internet. But because like most of the games, especially in those competitions where you have limited time, are too hard, because someone focuses on having a good experience for themselves, thinking that the balance is good, but they know every single aspect of the game, and they know how to do things, what to do in the game. And most of the feedback that is done by other participants to the entry that is already submitted, and it's like literally 5 minutes after the deadline, and they're like, oh crap, I could have made this a little bit easier, because people don't know how to control the game, or like have difficulty getting through the first level. So yeah, like sharing the game to be tested and remembering that it should be easier than you think it uh, is quite important.
Another one that I'm looking at some of the other games you have, because some of these look like games that I might want to build. So another one's the Wizard Quest, and it looks, just at the screenshots, it looks like it's kind of like like a Candy Crush or something, where you're moving the pieces
Match
around.
3 type of game. Yeah.
But it also looks like it kind of has a trail or a story to it.
Yeah, that's a little bit more complicated game. There's actually a funny story with that game, because when you don't know how to build games or starting to do that, you think that making games is easy. There is the famous mistake that you do, that a whole lot of people are like, okay, let's build the very first game, let's make it an MMORPG, let's try World of Warcraft but better, and after a few years in a basement trying to do something that works, you fail miserably. And the important thing is to start with as simple as possible. That's why I said at the beginning to try with Breakout clone, with Flappy Bird clone, because so Wizard Quest was the very first game I wanted to release as Enclave Games in 2012. I struggled a lot. I rewrote the game 7 times from scratch because it had to be perfect, and it still wasn't. There was always something new to do. There was always something to change, to update, and some things were just too difficult. So I throw that into the trash. I made Captain Rogers, which was literally, it's the first, the oldest game on the website, which is literally just flying in space and avoiding asteroids, and that's it. There is no shooting at all, and the bonuses are there only because those are the asteroids and have different effect on the player. So I was trying to build Wizard Quest, and it was really difficult. So I went with like, okay, let's build whatever. And I built that Captain Rogers, and then it was like I went through the whole process of testing, building, releasing a game. Then I started being invited all around the world to tell other people how to build web games, because I did that one, and it was always ending in some like top 30 best entries or whatever. And then I decided to build Wizard Quest. Like, I was literally, a few years later, I was traveling around the world giving a talk titled "How to Make a Simple Web Game in like 4 years or 5 years," because it literally took that time. After releasing Captain Rogers, building few other very simple games, out of which every single game was having some component that I would use in Wizard Quest, like let's use a map, let's have match 3 mechanic, let's show a list of beasts or items or whatever, let's manage sounds and music. So all of those games up until Wizard Quest helped me build confidence and skills. And after those few years, then I sit and decided to build Wizard Quest, and it literally took like, I don't know, 2 months of development, but the very first version in 2011, 2012, up until when Wizard Quest was released, took like 4 or 5 years. So it's still fairly simple game, but it was kind of important to build those skills, learn how to release games, and then know that some projects are still too big or will take too much time or need preparations.
Gotcha. I love that progression too, because it seems like, and I do this too, right? I get in and it's like, I'm going to do the big, massive thing. And part of the process is, doing it wrong, figuring it out, trying something, maybe, finding a different project to try it in where it doesn't have to interact with all the complex stuff that I've already got in there. And It's a process. It's a skill like anything else.
I mean, there are people who hid themselves in a basement for 5 to 10 years and released the very first game and made a huge success. But those are really only a handful of cases. That the similar thing about them is that they say that they almost went insane doing that.
Right.
So it's really, really challenging, difficult, and maybe not the best way. I mean, you could try that, but in most of the cases, if you go with this as smooth as possible, then it gets you the best results. And most of the developers I know really try to follow that progression somehow.
Yep, absolutely. So one other question that I have, we're kind of getting toward the end of our recording time, but one other question that I have related to this is, it looks like there might be a little bit of story component to some of these games. So how do you come up with a good story that kind of makes people want to go to the next stage and see what comes next?
Since we are focusing on hyper casual, there's not much of a story,
Right.
but the first entries. So what we did, because we were like, okay, let's do something, but what? And then there's a void, a black void of absolutely no ideas. And so we decided to participate in game jams and competitions, hackathons, because you have a theme and you have a fixed deadline for submitting. So we actually used events like Ludum Dare or Global Game Jam, where a theme was announced, and we were like, okay, we want to try experimenting with card game mechanic, or like tapping on the screen and moving from side to side, or like shooting at stuff. And then the theme is water, for example. Okay, so let's make a game where you jump on the floors up and avoid the flood. And that's how Flood Escape was created. So most of the stories, most of the ideas came from participating in a game jam. And if we liked the prototype that we built, because it doesn't have to be a full game, it could be just an interesting idea. If the prototype was good enough for us, and we thought it has a potential, then we were releasing the full game. And since those are still hyper casuals, they will take like 1 or 2 months or 3 months of development. So there's not much of an effort. And if it's a flop, if it fails, if people don't like it, that's fine. We learned new skills, and we can then move on to the next idea, to the next game, to the
Right.
next hackathon, and see if the next game will be more interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you don't spend a ton of time on story or character development. It's just something you can sit on the toilet and play. But
yeah, again, like it could be like super interesting story, and you spend 5 years on it, and it's like totally innovative, nobody else done it. All the Enclave games creations are really simple, and the core mechanic was done like hundreds of times already.
Right.
So they are not original, but they are fun. That's the most, like, it was fun for me to try that and release it. And it's fun to play them for some of the folks, and that's totally enough. And if publishers are coming to us and saying, hey, we like this game, we want to license it, then it means it works, and we can work on more games and grow the catalog.
Yeah, it makes sense. My son, the games that he's into are much more involved and have much more of a story to him. So I think his favorite game is Undertale. He's also into Deltarune, which is the sequel to that. And then there's one on the Nintendo, and I can't remember what it's called, but he's way into that, right? So yeah, I'm aware that Toby Fox or some of the other people that have put those games together spent a good deal more time, working out, the play mechanics and the fighting mechanics and the movement mechanics and the storylines from the characters and things like that. Whereas, yeah, you're putting something together that people it gets progressively harder maybe as they advance levels, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's not something that is that involved as far as engaging the player to play hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of the game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's good if the game are engaging. If you want to get back and play them, I remember that I wanted to release games that I would play and get back to playing, and that was kind of important. And if others would be enjoying them as well, that would be awesome. But like we didn't have I know there are companies that will see what are the current trends or like copy some of the native games as soon as possible, as quick as possible, and release them. I guess it works for them because they are still in the business. But the cool thing is you can have totally different approaches. You can still find your niche, and you can still make a living out of that.
Cool. So I have one more thing. Two more things I'm going to ask, and then we'll wrap up. The first one is you have a game hackathon, and I think I saw the link to Game Dev JS on it. Is that something that you run, or is that just something that you're affiliated with? I think it's the JS13kgames.com.
So it's actually two. Even so, the JS13K Games is a competition that runs since 2012 every year. So we already had like 11th editions or something like that. So that's quite a challenge because you have to build a web game in 13 kilobytes zipped. So not every web game developer will be able to participate. But apparently, this was like, I'm not gonna do it, and they were like, so it got quite popular, and many folks are trying that as a challenge on itself to build something in 13 kilobytes. So we really have a cool community around that. This is happening online in August. You have a whole month to build a game, so it's not like 8 hours hackathon where you don't sleep, eat pizza, and do Incredibles.
I've done those. They're kind of fun.
Yeah, I did those as well. So many global game jams. So that's also cool where you're young.
Yeah.
And like folks participating in JS13K are like, okay, I'm going for a 2-week vacations with my family and I'm still getting back and I still can release something. Like I have a full-time job and I have only evenings and I still can do something. Or like other situations, and you can actually there are folks who participate in JS13K. They have a whole month, but they select one weekend and spend time building something for that. So JS13K is one thing, and the other is something newer, Game Dev JS Jam, which runs online in April. And this one is more open and more general. So as long as something is if it works, if you can launch it in a browser, it's a web game, so it automatically qualifies. So it doesn't matter the size. It doesn't matter if you exported it from Unity or coded from scratch, if you use jQuery, Phaser, or Construct or whatever. But you have 13 days, so it's a little bit shorter, but it's still not 48 hours. And the Game Dev JS Jam is quickly getting quite popular, since it's fairly easy, at least it's easier than a few years ago, to actually build something. So the Game Dev JS Jam is more general, so I highly encourage you to try that first. And then JS13K is quite the challenge, so if you want to challenge yourself, this is the ultimate thing. And but the cool thing is, what I mentioned is that all the games from all the years are on the website, so you can play them, and the source code of every single entry is on GitHub, so you can see how people over the years created those games and take some inspiration from that. So Game Dev JS Jam in April and JS13K Games in August are those two competitions that I'm organizing. and JS13K since 2012, Game Dev JS Jam since 2020.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm just going to throw out a shout out to gamedev.js, or it's gamedevjs.com is the domain. Just the newsletter's awesome. I haven't joined the Discord server. I just saw that on the website. But yeah, there's just so much cool stuff that comes through it. So I'm just going to shout that out. I'd like to get us into picks, and we do a self-promo segment ahead of that. So I'm just going to move us over there. Before we do that, though, besides the websites we've already mentioned, are there other places for people to follow you or connect with you online?
So there's my website, n3r.com, but it's basically me sharing all the other things I'm doing. So it's Enclave Games, JS13K Games, Game Dev JS, which is the newsletter, Game Jam. We also run the Game Dev JS survey since 2021, so it's quite a new thing. We had so gamedevjs.pl was like local meetups in Warsaw, but the pandemic hit, so we decided to skip it, and it haven't returned yet. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of things around web games. If you can find a topic about web games, some activity, I'm probably doing it. If you haven't found a website about it, then it probably failed, but I've tried that at some point anyway.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do the self-promo stuff. We kind of let you do it already because you told everybody where to go find you. AJ, do you have something that you're working on that people should know about?
I can't think of it today.
Okay.
I mean, I'm working on stuff, but
yeah. Yeah, so I'm still working on the stuff I mentioned last week. Basically, it's the careers show, so Catapult Your Coding Career. I'm also getting ready to launch another show called the Developer's Toolbox, or I think it's just Developer Toolbox because I think that's the domain I wound up with. Anyway, Developer Toolbox is going to be basically interviews with folks that build dev tools, right? So it may be a commercial thing like Sentry or Raygun. It may be a free thing like VS Code. So anyway, just keep an ear out for that. Because we'll talk about what problems they solve, why you might want to use them, how to get them set up, and just make sure that you have everything you need to benefit from them. And then Catapult Your Coding Career is going to be career advice. And I talk to a couple people a week probably, and I answer their questions. So that's mostly what I'm going to base that on, is just the coaching I'm doing. And I guess if you want to get coaching, you can go to topenddevs.com/coaching. All right. Let's go ahead and do picks. I see AJ's mouth moving, but I don't know if he's talking to us because he's muted.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Okay, because it said I was not muted, but okay. Anyway, there was one thing. I created a tool called Aliasman, and what it does is manage your aliases for you. And a lot of people just use one shell, and if you're using, I think if you're using ZSH, I think there's a way that when you create an alias from the command line, you can just have it save automatically, so wouldn't apply to you. But if you switch between shells, for example, I switch between Fish and Bash based on what I'm doing, but I want my aliases to be present in both. Aliasman allows me to define an alias from the command line rather than having to go and edit the file manually, and then it exports it to both shells. So I can have my alias and eat it too. And that's up on webinstall.dev/aliasman.
Awesome. All right, let's do picks. AJ, what do you got for us in picks?
So I'm going to pick OC Remix. I have had very, very few problems with licensing issues. The only issues that I've had have been someone has a sub-license of a song and they're making copyright claims against people who are using the song who also have a sub-license, which I think is just kind of dirty, because if you're not the copyright holder, then you shouldn't be making copyright claims based on a sub-license. And then another one was a stupid parody account which had remixed the song that I was using, made a copyright claim against me. But other than that, and I've been streaming OC Remix for a year, or as the background music in my streams. Other than there was 3 instances, and they all happened recently. I'm guessing with a recent YouTube algorithm copy match change to their algorithm. It's been wonderful. And OC Remix, you can select a tag, so you can select high energy or low energy or ambient or chill or classical or whatever. And there's a lot of tags where there's hundreds of songs, so you can stream for quite a few hours before you end up back in a loop where you're listening to the same thing. And of course, you can download the music, you can put it in your own music player, you can curate your own playlists. It's all, some of it's original, some of it is remixes of game music. I don't know how all the copyright works, but I'm guessing that since a lot of this is retro and a lot of it's exported from Japan, I think that the way the copyright works is that basically stuff that was made in the 80s in Japan is no longer under the same copyright protection for music or something. So there are a lot of scores that are really, really similar. I mean, they're renditions, they're remixes, but they're basically the same thing as the original tune. So, you get some nice original music, you get some nice remixes. And so, and I'm putting a link to their content policy, which is very generous. It's basically, unless the primary purpose of what you're doing is making music for money, you can use this. It's streamer safe, essentially. And then I will also pick, there's a company called Ballerini, and they sell at Costco, and you can also buy them on Amazon and stuff, except you probably wouldn't get as good of a deal as you'll get at Costco. But they're one of those companies that's only in Costco a couple times a year, so you got to catch them. I'm linking to their schedule, but these are the best nonstick cookware. It's the best nonstick cookware set in the universe, as far as I know. It's real nonstick. It's not Teflon. They have this thing that they call granitium, which I think is just a fancy way to make it sound like it's that the Avengers took granite and formed a new element out of it. What I think it really is a extremely high temp epoxy that happens to have kind of a nano texture to it, so that it doesn't adhere. And you cook anything in it. You can burn stuff in it. We've had them for about 6 months, and I do the dishes. My wife cooks. I do the dishes. I have never yet had to take more than 10 seconds to get one clean after use. And then I am also going to pick 2 everyday carry knives. If you have been looking for a great everyday carry knife, see, I kind of got out of knives for a while because they're big and you can't take them on the airplane, and I was traveling a lot for a while, but I got back into it, and there are 2 knives that I found that I really, really love. Not just like, but the second one in particular I love, but the first one I loved until I found the second one. So there's this, it's a brand that they sell at Walmart called Utility Series. It's just kind of a no-name brand, but it's better than the Gerber. It's better than the, I'm blanking on the other name. It's better than the name brands that you think of when you think of outdoor, everyday carry stuff. It's just this no-name brand called Utility Series, and it's perfect. It clips onto your keychain. It's nice and small. It has a knife, scissors, and a flathead, and I think that's it. And it's just wonderful. It's lightweight. My wife has it on her keychain. I bought a bunch of them. I give them out as gifts now. They're amazing. And the other one is a keychain knife called, it's by EDC Fans, and it's their keychain knife. It's just called Keychain Knife, and it's got 2 knives on it: a straight blade and a serrated blade. It's actually a little bit bigger in every dimension than the Utility Series, but it feels smaller. It's got a square design rather than the typical Swiss Army knife looking round design. And it feels great, and it feels like a real knife. It's not just a little pen knife. It's a short knife, but it's a real knife. And I'm super excited about it. Absolutely love it. I think it's great. If you're into that, check it out.
Yeah, I just carry a box cutter around with me. Anyway, so my picks, I usually do a board game pick. We did a board game, or we played some games with some friends last night, and we played a game called Mysterium. And effectively, what it is you, we played it. I think you can play it with 6 or 7 people. But yeah, so and it wasn't that complicated. It took a little bit to get it set up and figure out how to play it. Our friends had played it, so they kind of walked us through it, but it wasn't that complicated. They play it with their kids, sorry, and I think it took us an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So the way that it works is you have one player who's the ghost, and then you have up to 6 players who are the psychics, and the psychics are trying to solve these murders. And so you start out and you have all of the people laid out, their cards face up, and then you have the places and their cards face up, and then you have the motives for the murders and their cards face up, and each psychic is trying to solve a different murder. And so this ghost is sending them visions from the beyond, and so they have cards that just have pictures on them, right? And they're kind of random. And so they have 7 cards, and they can give 1 or 2 cards to each person to give them a clue as to which person, because you pick the person first, and then and then if you're trying to find the location, which is next, then, the cards are clues for the location. So when you get the person, you clear all your clues, right? Because those visions don't apply to the place. And then you kind of move your way up. And so anyway, it was really fun. And what you're trying to do is, you're trying to solve your murder before the clock runs out. And then the other thing you do is you also have little tokens that you put on when other people guess their person or their place or their motive, then you guess whether they're right or wrong. And so you have 6 tokens, and so you don't have to use them all at once. And you get all your tokens back on the 4th round. So you do that, and you get points for that, and then your points determine at the end, after everybody solved their murder. If somebody doesn't solve their murder, the game ends and you lose. But if everybody solves their murder, then the ghost is trying to let people know which murder is their murder. And so they'll give 3 clues to which of the 6, in our case it was 5, which of the 5 murders is their murder. And the way you get the cards is by getting points by guessing who's right and wrong, or by solving your murder early. And so you get the points, and so you get to see 1, 2, or 3 of those clues, and then everybody guesses. And if the majority of the psychics at the table pick the correct murder, then you win. And so we lost at that point because everybody picked a different one. So anyway, but it was fun. It was really fun. So Mysterium it has a board game weight of 1.9. And as I've said over and over on this show, 2 is kind of a casual game. So this one fits right in, right? It's something that you could pick up, and it's not so complicated that it's like, I have a million pieces, or this is really hard to figure out. You play it through once and you got it. So anyway, I'm going to pick Mysterium. I'm sorry, that was a little long-winded, but it's a fun game. And then the other picks I have, this last week was just rough. Really close friends of mine lost their baby. She had a genetic defect, and so it was kind of, we were all kind of hoping for the best and waiting for the worst. But I just, and then I tweeted out there too. I was just like, hey, look, just hold on to the people you care about. And I guess you get this perspective every so often, right? When you lose someone you care about, or you're there with people who have lost people, but just recognize that, sometimes things aren't going your way, but you still have the people you love. You still have the work you love. And, just recognize some of the blessings in your life, as far as, that, I have 5 healthy kids, my marriage is great. Things are really good here. And so, do I have problems in my life? Yes. But to put it in perspective, right? I get to continue on with, the things I love and the people I love. And so, yeah, so just kind of keep that in mind as you, step out and see a problem, and just recognize that in the grand scheme of things, at least for right now, I always tell people to, my season of life is good, and, their season of life is hard. And, eventually it'll be my turn for something tough to go through to happen to me. But, appreciate those good times and hold on to the people you care about. All right, Andrzej, what are your picks?
So if I can, I will have a few, and if I can take from what we talked about, then I would encourage folks to first join the Game Dev JS Jam, which will be running April 13th, 26th, because we have a whole bunch of prizes, really cool experts, and it's literally open to anyone who would like to try building their first game from scratch with JavaScript, with any tools they can find. So that's the thing. Cool prizes and really cool community. Between April and August and other months as well, the Game Dev JS weekly newsletter with a whole bunch of interesting information every week in your inbox. Every Friday, some tutorials, demos, games, etc. The JS 13K Games competition, if you want to challenge yourself more than the jam, if you want to see how difficult it is to squeeze a game into 13 kilobytes. And the next, I would like to give a shout out to the Phaser creator, Rich Davey, who is doing an awesome job building the tool that I'm using since 2013 or 14. So that's a big part of my professional career. And since you mentioned board games, I'm gonna bring the one board game that I'm enjoying, Neuroshima Hex, which is a game from Polish creators. And I'm running a fan site of Neuroshima Hex since 2010. The game was released in 2006 or 5. And it's a really cool game if you like the post-apocalyptic themes. Then you have your own HQ, an army fighting with opponents on a hexagonal grid. And since the inception, there was 15 or 20 army add-ons. So there is a whole bunch of content to be consumed. Cool thing is, it took us 8 years to actually build something for Neuroshima Hex board game as web game dev creators. So we actually had some add-ons, digital add-ons to a physical board game, so you could keep track of the tiles or do a bunch of stuff specifically for the board game. And the cool thing is the board game is also available as an application, as a digital game for iOS and Android. So if you don't have the opportunity to actually check the physical board game, you can download that, play it, and see if you like it. I highly recommend that. It's really enjoyable, easy to learn, hard to master, and there's a lot of content to have. So I totally recommend that.
Awesome. All right, one last thing. I did want to also shout out about Game.Courses, which is, like I said, done by my friend Jason. So if you're looking to get into Unity, check his stuff out because it's awesome. And yeah, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. Thanks for coming. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. Well, until next time, Max out.